In this video, I want to go through the process of taking our latest version of our React quiz game and getting it deployed. So getting it hosted on a service so that we can share it with other folks and access it via a URL. We are going to use a service called Vercel for doing this. There are a lot of different services you can use for deploying your React application. Vercel is just a nice one that integrates and gives us a command line tool and gives us hooks so that we can actually set it up to redeploy every time we push to the main branch on GitHub. So this is the service we're going to use. A little bit of housekeeping to get started is that I have this quiz game from our past versions. I've got it open here. We've got the Git hidden folder that came from Create React App. So I'm just going to quickly, before I go ahead and actually get this deployed, add it to Git. So I'm going to add this local one, which is Teaching Application Design, Week 6. And you'll notice that because this is the first time that I've registered this with Git, the initial commit just has the template from Create React App, and then we've got 46 changes as we were building the quiz game over the past 5 weeks. So I'm just going to say initial version of the quiz game, get this committed, and then I will publish this. It doesn't really matter that this is published, but I do want this set up in Git for the demo that we're going to do because our Git ignore is going to change. So with React, we had seen previously that in the package, there is the start command and there is the build command. And if we do npm run build, what it does is generate a production-ready version of our application. It takes our JSX and it compiles it down to JavaScript so that browsers will understand it. And it does a lot of optimization to make sure that we're sending the least amount of bytes over the wire as we can get away with. So this will take a second to run. And while it's running, I will pull up the docs here. So createreactapp.dev has information on the deployment process and on this production build process. If I click on the production build, we can see a description of that command that we're running. The build creates a build folder that packages up everything into a ready to deploy format. It actually uses a caching technique. So every time we build, we get a new hash in a lot of our file names that enables us to do kind of long-term caching. In the context of what we're doing, it's good to know that that's what's happening, but it doesn't matter to us. We're going to kind of let Vercel take care of that. But if we open up the build, now that this has finished, we can see those files in this static folder. We can see our JS files that have been split with their hashes in them. We can see our media files that are in this project, our CSS hashes in those as well for caching. This folder is ready to go to be hosted on some kind of service. Part of the process, though, of deploying is usually like testing that folder locally on your machine to make sure that what works when we are in our dev command of npm run start also works in the production build. And we can do that here. We're getting some instructions that you can use the serve package to go ahead and serve up this build folder. And if we flip back here to the deployment page, it's telling us like, here, go ahead, install the global package serve, and then you can serve your build folder. And that it's normally on port 5000, but there are a whole bunch of options that the serve command takes that you can mess around with. So let's at least just check that this works before we deploy. So npm I g for npm install global, and let's use the serve. package. So this will take a second to go ahead and install that globally. And once that's installed globally, I will be able to say serve and then S and pass in the folder that we want to serve. So we want to serve that build folder. It is now serving. So if I check out localhost port 5000 in my browser, here's our project with our quiz loading, our demo pages. Everything is being served up over port 5000 here. So quick check, looks like it's good to go. We've got our local build. We have a lot of options for where we host this, and a lot of them are laid out on this deployment page. So for instance, there's a section on how to use GitHub Pages, which requires you to modify some information before building. And there's a section on using Firebase, which we'll be getting into later, but this allows you to host via Google's Firebase and Heroku and Netlify, and then Vercel, which is the one we're going to be using here. So first step is head to vercel.com and create an account. I'm already logged in, so I don't have the button here, but make sure that you create an account before moving forward. And then I will have the Vercel command line tool documentation pulled up here. But basically what we're going to do is install Vercel globally. It'll give us another command line tool, and then we will use that to deploy our application. So if I come back in here, I can say npm i-g Vercel for installing Vercel globally. Since it's already installed on my machine, this should not change anything. I think that's the version that I already had installed, so we're all good there. Once you have Vercel installed, let me clear this. You're going to run Vercel login, which is going to ask you for your email address that you created your account with, and then it is going to send you an email that you click on the link that will finish the login process. I'm already logged in, so I'm going to just hit Control-C to abort this. And then we can just run Vercel here. So this command, without any parameters, is going to look at our current folder, the React Quiz game, and ask if we want to set this up to deploy, which is what we want. We want the folder that has our package.json and that contains our source and public and build folders. So that's the right folder. I'm going to hit yes. And it's going to ask me which scope under my account I want to deploy to. There's only one, so I'm just going to hit enter. Because I already had a quiz game in there from a past class, I'm going to hit no. I don't want to link it. And let's call this SP21 React Quiz Game. It's asking what directory my code is in, and this is the current directory, so that looks good. I'm going to hit enter. Oh, and of course I made a mistake here of trying to put in some capital letters, so I'm going to just run that again. Yes, scope is good. No, no. Let's try that again with lowercase letters. React Quiz Game. Okay, so now it takes a second to upload our project to our account after creating a new project here. In that process, it recognized our project settings, so it knows that this is a Create React app and has detected that here's the build command, here's where the output is stored, here's the development command. So this is good because we haven't modified anything. So we can say, no, we don't want to override any changes. It's going to start the deploy process. So we can see that it created a .vercel file and added .vercel to our git ignore. So that's why I set up git before we started this process. And then if I click on this inspect link, in the browser, it's showing me the build process. So the way that Vercel works for our React application is that it's going to go ahead and run the npm run build command on the server. So it's going to start off by installing the dependencies, then build, and then we'll see all of the normal output here. And this is going to take a little while, so I'm just going to flip back. And let's hide this a little bit and look at that new file that it created. Or a new folder. So it created a .vercel file with a project.json, which is how it knows how to associate this project with our Vercel project. So which account, which project. So we want to keep that here. We don't want to delete this. There's a little bit of a README here of how to work with this. And if we look at our git ignore, it has added .vercel because we don't want that exposed in our source code. There's no reason why anyone cloning our project needs to know about our org project ID in addition to, along with the source code. So that has been added. And you can see that change here in our GitHub desktop. So I would want to commit and say added Vercel to git ignore and commit it, push that. So those are the changes that it has made. And now that we have given it some time to finish running, our deploy has finished. And it tells us like, oh, here's the link. You can click on this to check it out in your browser. And here's our deployed version of our application with our quiz, our about page, our demo. Everything looks to be working fine. If I flip back to the inspect page, we can see it installed the dependencies, it ran npm run build, it gave us all the output that we saw on our local machine about like, here's how you could serve it. It's running that command on the server. And then if we flip over to the source tab, this will allow you to see what has been deployed. So the source is your source of your project that you sent up there. If I click on app, we can see here's our source code that we sent up there. And then the output panel shows you what was built from the npm run build. So we can see our static folder that has our JS files with their hash in them. So all it did was run that npm run build on a server for us. And you get a couple of URLs with this project. So this URL here and the one with my account name, these are the production URLs. So generally speaking, you have one production URL, and that is like the most recent version of your application that's stable that you want people to interact with. Here, we also have a unique URL, a preview URL that is just for this version that we pushed live. So right now, the production and the preview are the same thing because we only pushed one thing live. But you can see that the preview URL is unique. It's got its own hash in it. So every time we make a preview deploy, we're going to get a new link. And we can use that to test things. Like we can share just the preview with our teammates to check it out without taking down the production that maybe our users are seeing and interacting with. So just to highlight the difference between these two, what I want to do is make a change and redeploy. So maybe instead of this being homepage, this is the homepage. I'm going to come back to my application and I'm going to go to homepage. And maybe we want this to say, please log in instead of welcome to the homepage. And eventually we'll build a whole login system, blah, blah, blah. But we just want a small change so that we can see what happens when we redeploy. So we would normally, if we're adding a bunch of features, it'd be good to test this with our build. So npm run build and then use serve to check it out. But in this case, it's a really small change. So let's just redeploy. And if I run Vercel without any commands, because this is already a Vercel project, this runs a preview deploy for us. So it gives us a new URL so that we can watch that build process going. So here's our previous one. Here's our new one. And this is going to take a little bit to rebuild. So I'm going to just pause the recording while that's running and come back to it when it's finished. And that has finished. So now I could click visit to check out my preview, which has my home login and it has a new hash in the URL. So this is a unique build. So we can uniquely come to that last push. And then over here, my production URL without the hash, if I refresh this, it's still on that initial version that we pushed to Vercel. So Vercel maintains for you these two URLs. One is going to be the preview that has the hash, and one is going to be the production, which never changes. So if you send this URL to someone, they're always going to see the latest version of whatever you push to production, versus this one is unique just for that one build. So this can be really useful. And if you wanted to, you decided like, oh yeah, that last thing looked good, let's take it live to production, you can run this command. So Vercel with the option of --prod. This is going to run a new deploy that takes whatever you're giving it and actually puts it at that production URL, the one without the hash. So this will take more time to finish building, so I will go ahead and pause while this is building. And it finished building. So again, we're going to get a unique preview URL for this deploy, but we should also be able to go back to our previous production page that we had open, hit Control-R to refresh it, and see now that that production deploy has changed. So if you're working on your project, you're working with your team, it's good to make these regular preview deploys with Vercel to get things live, to test them out, and make them publicly accessible. And then when you feel confident in the feature set and you want it to be live in kind of an evergreen way where anyone who goes to your site sees the latest features, then you come back and do a production deploy with --prod. So there's more for us to dig into with Vercel. In particular, you can hook up Vercel to GitHub. So now that we've covered GitHub, you can actually have your project redeploy every time you make a new push. And you can configure it so that some pushes trigger a preview deploy and some pushes trigger a production deploy. So that will be really helpful when we start working in teams. It's good to have that in mind. We're not going to do that just yet. And other things we'll dig into when we start hooking up our project to a backend is dealing with having environment variables. So secret keys that we're putting into Vercel that our project can use. But with that, you should now be able to take your quiz game and get it deployed both to a preview URL and to a evergreen production URL.